Welcome to another edition of the One Hood Power Hour. This is your co-host Kahari Mosley with my illustrious team of co-hosts once again, Miracle Jones and Ryan White, and we definitely have another exciting conversation this evening. All January we've been having some really great conversations from Congressman Doyle to Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman to Senator Jim Brewster last weekend, and we have another great group of folks tonight that we're going to speak to. We have an exclusive interview that's going to start shortly with Mayor Nickole Nesby of Duquesne, and we also will be joined later in the hour by Ryan Deto of the Pittsburgh City Paper, as well as Chris Potter from WESA-FM, and they've been kind enough to join us for the majority of the hour to talk about all the upcoming elections in Pennsylvania, as well as a lot of the elections in Western Pennsylvania. Boy, is there a lot to talk about when it comes to elections in Western Pennsylvania over the last week. It's been a lot. So before we go to Mayor Nesby, Miracle, Ron, do you have any really quick takes that you want to share?
It's been a lot, Biden has been pushing out executive orders almost like every single day. Today, rescinded the ban that would prevent people of trans experience from serving, has stopped for 100 days deportations, even though a lot of some ICE agents aren't cooperating. So there's been a lot of stuff going on, and even here in Pennsylvania, there has been a discussion of how some of the elected officials tried to interfere with the election. So Pennsylvania, unfortunately, is still dealing with election 2020, even though we're trying to move on to election 2021. So it's a lot of stuff is happening.
Right. Yeah. As Miracle was just saying, a lot of the chaos we've seen at the federal level, with the election controversy is really still being mirrored in an ongoing fashion at the state level. With the state representative who, or the representative who was involved, in the Department of Justice getting involved in potentially trying to overturn the election. Yeah. So that's, been a wild development. The New York Times over the weekend, and, that representative, didn't deny it, didn't try to downplay his involvement, is very open about it. So, and his participation in that. So, we'll see if anything comes from that. I don't, anticipate any sort of resignation on his end, but we'll see if, they can have any sort of consequence or accountability there. And then, we're going to be talking about this for most of the show. But there's been, a lot more developments at the local level as far as local politics go. With Bill Peduto announcing his reelection campaign in the same week that he's again, surrounded by a ton of controversy for his Twitter comments. Ed Gainey announcing his campaign around the same time. So definitely a lot to talk about tonight.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thanks for those hot takes. And now many of you have seen over the past couple of days a very disturbing video out of Duquesne, Pennsylvania. A constituent who was meeting with Mayor Nickole Nesby was arrested. And it was streamed live on Mayor Nesby's Facebook page. It just seemed extremely disturbing. We're still trying to gather information about it. And then in the days following, the City Council of Duquesne decided to censure Mayor Nesby. So Mayor Nesby was gracious enough to join us tonight to give her perspective of all the events that have happened in the city of Duquesne. So we are so excited to welcome Mayor Nickole Nesby from the city of Duquesne to the One Hood Power Hour. Welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me today. It has definitely been an honor to serve the city of Duquesne. Although it has had some difficulties, it's a great experience.
Absolutely. So could you give us just a little bit of background, on what happened, what you're able to share about, the meeting with the constituent, and then the steps following that, the choice of Duquesne City Council to censure you, and just talk about, what's going to follow in the days to come and what that means, for you. And I believe you're running for re-election this year as well, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct. That is correct.
Great.
So, Yes, I am running for re-election. I plan to announce on Thursday.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So take us back to last week, and what actually happened, because it looks so disturbing. We're still trying to wrap our head around.
Yeah, but he was saying we're still trying to wrap our head around what happened. So from your point of view, can you just walk us through the events of last week and what led up to the vote?
Yes. On Tuesday's meeting, on our workshop meeting, we had a discussion on identifying individuals who were in and out of the building and what protocol would be for the city of Duquesne to follow. I asked for a written clarification from our solicitor. That forward classification was not released until 10:09 on January the 15th of 2021. We had followed protocol to where we came in the door. The constituent signed in. She had her temperature checked and she went directly to my office, which was locked. So while we were in there having a discussion, the new updates came out with the clarification from the solicitor. We were in my office. We heard a knock at the door before I could get up. The city manager entered my locked room, my locked office, with a key with the lieutenant to remove the constituent. She placed a copy of the new updated policies, again sent at 10:09 that morning, and instructed the lieutenant to remove the constituent. But at no point in time was any explanation given. I had asked them to calm down. When I was ignored, I started recording. But this is the type of hostility that I've been faced with ever since I've come into office. On day one at City Hall, I had a grievance filed against me my very first day in office. And the type of behavior has continued as we're trying to move the city forward.
Yeah, thank you again for providing a rundown of that. Yeah, so I think we're in agreement here that, that was not the, appropriate or correct response to immediately begin with when you were in that meeting, to come in with that type of hostility, and immediately involve the police and everything along those lines. So, how would you have preferred that ideally, how would that situation have been handled, especially given that, those COVID regulations had apparently just been changed at that time?
This has been a type of hostile environment that has been inside City Hall. First of all, if there was an issue with the COVID violation, what we had here is individuals who were towards the end of this the altercation. You'll see that there were employees outside with cameras, with their cell phones, as well as the councilwoman. So when we first came in the building, if there was a problem, the city manager's door was open at the time when we came in. The city manager didn't say anything. So we went into it was my locked office. City Hall is the people's. A constituent should be able to talk at any point in time with their elected officials about their concerns, about their issues, especially when they are the taxpayer. And that is what we were doing at that particular point in time. But council is upset and expressed their displeasure in the fact that we had 373 households which were on the termination list for water during the pandemic. And I started receiving phone calls from individuals whose water was terminated, where they had loss of income, they had infants, and their water was being terminated. And we, as council members in the city of Duquesne, get to make that decision. Rather, the water services stays on or not. We're not regulated by the PUC, so they can't come in and tell the municipality what to do. But as the mayor, and these are issues that we're facing within our community, we need to find ways to help them. So what happened is during the pandemic, I reached out to Southwestern Pennsylvania 411, engaged with community organizations to assist with financial resources to help the individuals whose water was terminated. You know, again, when you say, how would I like this to be handled? I would love for it to be handled differently. That's why I created the Citizens Police Review Board to help improve relationships with police and our community. And as you can see from the video that has been shared, that we actually need assistance with that. I would really like to have an external investigation into the actions and transparency of everything that transpired that day, and recommend, actions to take corrective action so that this doesn't happen again. And, lastly, I expressed, concerns to the employees on how they deliver services to our constituents. You have to understand that your salary is paid by these individuals. When they come in to pay their water bill or their taxes, you should greet them with a smile. You should say, please, thank you, have a good day. Because again, it is their tax dollars that pay your salary.
Yeah, and I know you referenced the stuff that's happened, you said since day one. And so one of my questions is, we talk a lot about, respecting and protecting Black women. What are some of the things that people can do to help and support you at this time?
I am up for re-election for this year. If someone would like to donate to my campaign, that would be great. My campaign is Friends of Nickole Nesby. The address is P.O. Box 655, Duquesne, Pennsylvania, 15110. We will be door knocking as well as registering voters in the next weeks to come. Come out, participate. If you live inside the city of Duquesne, we have created 10 committees to help move our city forward that we're working to actually have it updated on the website so that you can actually come out and participate. You need to know what's going on inside your government. You need to participate. It's either you're going to be part of the problem or part of the solution. And I think that the more that we teach and educate and empower our community, the more they will become more involved.
And one quick question. I apologize. I had some technical issues. Did you see this impacting, your re-election campaign? Do you see an opponent or anything like that emerging, out of this incident?
I really don't know. But, as when we elect officials, I think we need to start looking at their qualifications, rather you like them or not. You can't continue to put people in powerful political positions when they're not qualified in order to be there. And I think that that's very important as well. I do my best for the city. We worked when I first came in to restore bus services to the residents out in Duquesne Place. We partner with Pittsburghers for Public Transit, Just Harvest, and other community boroughs in order to have changed the way that the 59 ran inside the city of Duquesne. We've even lobbied since then to have the buses come now every 30 minutes instead of an hour. These are the things that you do to help improve the quality of life for your constituents. We also have in-city farms. We have a $30 million private investment that is going to come to the city of Duquesne. We're waiting right now to hear when the breaking ground is going to be. But that's 260 jobs, $35,000 entry-level positions. I mean, some of our children coming out of school as seniors going into the workforce can make $35,000 right out the door. This is the biggest thing happening to our region since the steel mill. But that's when you elect people in power, that's what you do. At the end of the day, they should have some type of legacy or something. Don't let them keep sitting in office for years and years and years and it not benefit the community.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This is Duquesne Mayor Nickole Nesby giving us firsthand information about all of the controversy that has happened over the past week in the city of Duquesne. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to continuing this conversation over the next couple of months, and we wish you the best, not only for you, but for the people of Duquesne. So thank you again for joining us, Duquesne Mayor Nickole Nesby.
Thank you for having me.
And again, that was Duquesne Mayor Nickole Nesby joining us, sharing her firsthand perspective from the controversy last week. Wow, such a mind-boggling, situation. Again, we're still, wrapping our heads around it, and we'll continue to, wish the best for the people of Duquesne.
Yeah, and like she said, she's been dealing with a lot of this pushback since the day she got elected. The council has voted against a lot of her amendments. She's tried to hire local Duquesne residents for various jobs. Council has pushed back against it. So there's been a lot of stuff. When we talk about progressive mayors and people trying to get things accomplished, when there's the city council and the mayor is at odds, it really hurts the residents, and we're really seeing this play out in Duquesne. So hopefully things will change, and a lot of the investment and support that this residents of Duquesne need to hopefully get soon.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add real quick that I think the situation is yet another textbook example of why we need alternative first responders or other people who can respond to these type of incidents. Because whether or not clearly there's a dispute as to what the COVID regulations were when they were put in place, etc. But irregardless of that, this is not a situation, from what I saw in the video and everything else I've heard about it, where police, armed police, anything like that need to be involved in any degree. That just elevates the tension and potential for violence in any situation. So if the person needed to be escorted out of the building, it is what it is with the regulations. But we got to have people who can be trained to do that without sending in law enforcement when it doesn't need to be criminalized.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we know, and obviously I know firsthand of how horrible situations can go, once, law enforcement is called in, unnecessarily. So again, we wish the best for, the people of Duquesne, wish the best for Mayor Nesby, as she continues her stewardship over a city that has seen its challenges, a city that's truly seen its challenges as, the deindustrialization, of the Rust Belt, of this part of the country. So, Duquesne, needs, much support as possible as that city tries to turn around, a 40, 50 year, trend of as, the steel industry fell apart, in a once very booming town on the Monongahela River. So now we go from local politics to more local politics with the two esteemed local journalists who have been covering a lot of the races and doing a lot of just great writing and reporting about local races. And that's Ryan Deto from the Pittsburgh City Paper and Chris Potter from WESA-FM. And they are going to be joining us to talk all about the upcoming May 18th primary and all the elections that are going to be on the slate and all the personalities involved and all and most importantly, the fun part is all the palace intrigue that we can gossip about over the next few minutes. So really excited. Thank you for joining us, Ryan and Chris. You guys have been doing such a great job, covering these local elections, from the judicial races to obviously the marquee race. And I guess we'll just start there. Whoever wants to jump in, the elephant in the room, the Pittsburgh mayor's race. Ryan, maybe we could start with Ryan, because you did write a piece that not only was covered in your publication, but also in the PA Capital Star about Bill Peduto's announcement. And then we can jump into the big announcement from State Representative Ed Gainey over the weekend.
Sure. Yeah. The mayor kind of kicked off his campaign last Thursday, I believe. What I wrote in my story was that he was really focused on a very positive image of Pittsburgh He really wanted to portray that like his 8 years in tenure or 7 years have been a positive role for good for the city. And so he really just hammered that, positive message on basically everything, whether it's like immigration or development or transit and even policing, which is probably a more controversial take considering what happened last year. But he really just, focused on that positive message. Pittsburgh's on the up and up, kind of hinted that like the population is growing when it's like not really, but that kind of stuff.
Right. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of talk there about how the city had weathered crises, especially at the end. Most of that campaign kickoff was a sort of Zoom meeting with the mayor and then a number of kind of folks active in the community who were supportive of him. And then he kind of gave a little speech at the end, and he talked about sort of, the crises that the city had overcome on his watch. So there was the fiscal issue, which is, goes back many, many years. The efforts to solve it also went back before him as well. Pension issues, which is an issue in a lot of municipal and state level governments. PWSA was one that he brought up. Folks probably remember there was so much concern about the presence of lead pipes in that water system, in addition to like the billing problems they had for a long time, and then just basic leakage all over the place. He said, look, we took all these things on and we sort of wrestled them down, and we've kind of gotten past them, and we're moving forward. And we're in a situation now, a crisis because of the coronavirus. The protests that Ryan mentioned, also very disruptive for the city. And he said, we're going to get through that stuff as well if I get this third term. And the mayor's always been, I don't think anybody was surprised. The mayor has been very clear that he hoped to serve 3 terms as the mayor. So his announcement last week is pretty much a foregone conclusion. What wasn't, of course, was the entry of Ed Gainey. A lot of people have been talking about it for months. But even as late as last week, people that I was talking to who were supportive of the effort and are involved in it were a little uncertain about when or even if he would actually be announcing this campaign. And so he did, in fact, although the campaign officially launched on Saturday, there was a sort of somewhat anticlimactic from my point of view email sent Tuesday night, the night before the inauguration, which it was a slow news day, so we had nothing else to do other than report on that. But that was sort of the kickoff for it, and now we are in a race.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. It was kind of like wasn't really certain what was going to happen, whether or not he was going to run, and then when he did, it just it kind of came as a surprise, but also expected at the same time. And but yeah, it seems to be one of the bigger, more legitimate challengers that Deto has had, especially considering his last reelection, which wasn't very competitive. So we'll see this year.
Absolutely. Miracle.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to ask real quick. So you both talked about how Deto kicked off his announcement, focusing on the positives, optimistic. Again, which makes sense. He's been in office for 8 years, so he's got to try to emphasize the good that he's done to this point. But so between that, staying on the positive side so far, and the relationship going back several years that Gainey and Deto have of supporting each other in their relative races that you both also covered in their stories. Do you think this is going to be a pretty clean campaign as far as that goes? Competitive, obviously.
I wouldn't want to speculate. What I will say is that thus far it was interesting. I interviewed Mr. Gainey, Representative Gainey, at some length last week, and if the name Bill Deto came up in that interview, I was the one who brought it up. I mean, he was pretty critical of the administration or of where the city was. He would say things a lot like, if we haven't gotten there in 8 years, you're not going to get there in another 4. And that was as close as he came to really sort of a kind of frontal, attack on the mayor. But he didn't mention the mayor's name. And I wouldn't be surprised if that continues for as long as Mr. Gainey can keep that going. And I think as well for the mayor, they are former allies. It's not 100% clear to me what exactly happened between the two of them. There was, as I understand it, some friction over the District 9 City Council race 2 years ago. They both kind of backed different candidates there. But, my efforts to ask Mr. Gainey about, well, where did this happen? Where was the breaking point? What was the schism? And he did not want to answer that question. So, that's clearly a choice on his part. But I think at some point, we always say when there's an election like this where there's an incumbent running for re-election, the race is always, whatever else it is, it's always at least partly a referendum on the incumbent and the job that they did. And I don't think you can prosecute that case without making the case against the person in office. So, will he try to keep it from being personal? It's so far, yes, and I would expect that to continue for a while. But clearly, he's going to be having to run against the Peduto record, if not Mr. Peduto himself.
Yeah, I think Gainey had a shot really recently if he wanted to call out Peduto because of Peduto's tweet about protesters. That might have been like an easy shot or a cheap shot, but it seemed like there was an opportunity that, a candidate could have attacked Peduto in that moment, and Gainey decided not to. So it seems like that I agree with Chris that like it's not going to be like necessarily a huge all the time anti-Peduto race, and maybe just here's where I want to see the city go. Here's the vision that I see. Definitely going to bring up the disparity between Black Pittsburghers' experience and white Pittsburgh experience. That's kind of where I see the race playing out.
Also, not commenting on that tweet directly struck me as pretty smart. I mean, it's another rule of politics is if your opponent is digging a hole for himself, don't stop him, right?
Right.
You're just like, okay, good luck with that. I'll just, Kimberly and Sarah Namorado are putting you on blast, and that's all that needs to happen there.
Yeah, but going off of tweets, since we're still in this age of COVID, and I do believe the DNC still has like a unofficial, you're not supposed to be out here campaigning mandate. How do you see the selection process going? Because tweets aren't working, Zoom isn't really giving the inspiration that you would like for a candidate to have. So are you hearing anything about what the outreach is going to look like?
I haven't heard anything yet about what the outreach is going to look like, but it's my understanding that usually local races like this are really fought more on the ground. So I think that will be really interesting to kind of see where people will be campaigning, if they're going to be door to door, if they're going to be, the turnout usually in off year races in Allegheny County is like 19%, 17%. So definitely gonna, and that usually means you want to get people to their door because you're not going to see big TV ads that often. You're not going to see as much Facebook, sponsored ads. There's just not as much money, even though there is a lot of money. There's just not as much money into these races. So I don't know. I think I might expect people to maybe defy those DNC orders and do a little door to door, but who's to say?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it would especially be an issue for Representative Gainey for a couple of reasons. One is he's quite good as a retail politician, and I mean that in a positive way. A lot of times people say politician doesn't. I mean, I value the service, and he's quite good at it. And it's already sort of a motif of the Gainey campaign. Ed Gainey shows up. He said that to me. I'm going to be there. I show up. He was at those protests, right? He came to a lot of those protests and spoke. He fires people up. He's charismatic. Yeah. And he's a presence. He is a presence. And so for him, I think he's, and also let's face it, he may not be known to a lot of folks. Not everybody knows the state representative in their own district, let alone somebody across town. And, I think that's a challenge. And I think as well, Mr. Gainey has never had to raise a heck of a lot of money for his own campaign efforts because he's in District 24. It's a mostly Black district. There's not a lot of money that gets spent on TV ads in the state rep race. Bill Peduto has proven he can do that. I think he raised upwards of $1 million in that first race when he ran back in 2013 because there were no campaign finance rules. The judge had tossed them out. Those rules are still in place now, and so that makes it tough. If you've got to raise, you got a lot of ground to cover, and you can only do it in little chunks. It's a harder lift. So I think that will be a challenge for Mr. Gainey. And two, he's going to have to appeal, I think, to sort of a disparate set of folks. I can remember, I think the last time Bill Peduto ran, he was facing a challenge from Darlene Harris, sort of representing a very conservative Democratic portion of the electorate, and then also John Welch representing sort of the opposite side of the spectrum, a very progressive challenge to Mr. Peduto. In a way, I think to win this race, you might have to appeal to kind of folks on both those sides, and I don't think that's going to be easy. I think that's really going to be a challenge. But on the other hand, clearly Bill Peduto would not be in this situation if he hadn't lost support from both of those sides. It's very tough to beat an incumbent mayor, but when you get to your third go-around, a certain amount of fatigue can set in. And so that'll be the question as to whether Mr. Gainey can kind of overcome those challenges and the late start, because I think he did kind of have a late start in terms of putting a team together, and whether he can kind of overcome some of that attrition that any mayor going into his third term would have experienced.
Right. Yeah, I think those are all great points. And Chris, as you talk, it reminds me, of a race 20 years ago that's somewhat similar, but not obviously they say history doesn't repeat, but sometimes it rhymes, and they're not obviously one-to-one comparisons, but I think about the 2001 Bob O'Connor versus Tom Murphy, where Ed Gainey has a similar appeal, different politicians, that
yes.
Bob O'Connor coached Little League. He was in the community. He showed up to things. He was personal. He was a Pittsburgh guy. Ed Gainey went to Peabody. Played with Cookie Harvey, for those who know City League basketball. George Harvey. He played with who's a City League legend. So he's a Pittsburgh guy. And that whole appeal. And that race came down to 600 votes citywide, and Bob O'Connor was underfunded, and there was obviously that Murphy fatigue, that set in as well. So from my vantage point, I'm kind of seeing some of the same dynamics, but not obviously, apples to apples. Like it's the exact same race from 20 years ago, but I just see some similarities. Does that ring true for you as well?
It does, except to the extent that Bob O'Connor ran as kind of like the Pittsburgh neighborhood guy. He was a figure it was kind of hard not to like on it, but there weren't a lot of edges to him, right? I mean, he didn't really run whereas Ed Gainey is running in a much more sort of politically charged environment. I mean, we are clearly not where we were back then in local politics. It's a much dicier era. And he's taken that by the horns. He has been president. Bob O'Connor wasn't going to be at any protest back in 1997 when we were talking about creating a review board, right? I think Bob O'Connor voted against that. I'd have to go back and take a look, but
I'm pretty sure he did.
But I agree. But I agree that I agree that there is that sense of sort of also that Bill Peduto in a lot of ways has some things in common with Tom Murphy. They were both kind of technocratic guys who sort of believed in kind of we're going to have these government reforms. They were progressives in maybe like the 1910 sense of the word. We'll come up with good ethics rules and good rules, and everything will be handled very professionally and all that stuff. Less of the retail politician, and less I think of a sense of just kind of regular people. They didn't have that common touch that Bob O'Connor did, and I think Ed Gainey certainly very much has that kind of same sort of thing. So I think it's very similar in terms of style. Even though very different in terms of sort of political substance and orientation.
That's a great way to frame it. Ryan?
Yeah, I wasn't obviously around back then in Pittsburgh as I grew up in California.
Ryan wasn't even a zygote back then. Come on.
But I do agree that, Gainey is extremely charismatic, and he does show up to every protest, event, everything. Like, City Paper covers a lot of those. Transit protests, housing, Black Lives Matter, all of them. And he is almost always there. And he almost always gives a speech, and it almost always is good. It's just, he's a very good speaker. Like, he knows how to rile up a crowd. And so if he can use that to his advantage, Peduto isn't as good a public speaker, but he does know the city really well. And he does have a lot of those technocratic fixes that he can play off of. If he can inspire people that way is another question, because a lot of people, I've written about those things, and they don't rouse people as much. And so that'll be interesting to see whether or not that that can kind of play through. If it comes down to speeches, I'm putting my money on Gainey.
But it can't just come down to speeches at some point, and we're not there yet, I don't think, this campaign. But at some point, there really is going to have to be a discussion of kind of specific policy fixes.
Right.
And I think, I don't know, even after talking with Mr. Gainey for some time last week, and it's very early in his campaign, so I don't attach too much importance to it. But at some point, it's really going to be contingent on us and the press and people in the public to really kind of ask, okay, well, what do you propose to do about it? Are we for defunding police? To what extent? Where do we kind of stand on all those sorts of issues? What is the fix to affordable housing if what we haven't done hasn't worked? Where are you on some of these issues? And, he has a legislative record, especially with police reform and things like that. But sometimes that stuff, it's a different, when you're running the city, you're constrained by state law, as we've seen. There's some truth to when the mayor says that. And what are the sort of specific policy prescriptions? And I think those are going to be important. We can talk, Ryan and I, politicos get all head up about the sort of optics and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, we really are going to need to have a serious discussion about how do we fix these issues.
Yeah, I'm really, really interested to learn more about what Gainey is going to be proposing for housing, for development policy. I think a lot of voters want to get there too eventually. Obviously, it's pretty early in that campaign, so people aren't going to be like barging down the door for that. But me as a transit writer too, I'm really interested to see kind of what his transit approach is. What can the city do? These are all things that like city politicians, city mayors can do, versus giving a rousing speech about racial justice is definitely like a motivating thing, but it's not necessarily something that a mayor can have a super direct impact on all the time. So I'll be interested to see kind of like where that goes, because Peduto does have a lot of plans. He does have a lot of these kind of plans. Whether or not they are effective or whatever is another story, but I'll be interested to see that.
Right. I guess in some ways you could call it poetry versus prose.
Sure.
I'm going to. I'm not going to credit you for the line.
The next article.
Next lead.
That's why I come on this show. I get all my good ideas in one hit, man.
Hey, sometimes 30 years of writing raps comes into handy. Every now and then, always. And I know Ryan has another question, but one thing that I find fascinating, I just wanted to get your sense on before we jump back to Ryan White, is me, obviously, full disclosure, I've known Ed and Bill forever, since I was basically a kid right out of college. I've worked with Bill Peduto as a city council staffer when he was a city council staffer for Dan Cohen. I worked for Bill Peduto as his spokesperson the first time he ran for mayor. I've been friends with Ed forever. And for me, as someone who knows both of these individuals so well, what I find fascinating is a race where, for the first time, I think in a real way, Bill will have to play defense, because he's generally been an offensive, player, really, came to prominence, running against O'Connor, then running against Ravenstall, and always was the one kind of on the outside, pointing the finger on offense. So I'm really fascinated to see how, for the first time, having, a real challenger, if, Representative Gainey's campaign really picks up steam, getting a sense of what Bill's like playing defense.
Yeah, especially my experience has been that he doesn't like being challenged from the left. You can challenge Donald Trump can tweet whatever he wants. Breitbart can say whatever they want about him, and it just seems to be water off a duck's back. But when he's challenged from the left, it hits closer to the bone for him, I think, and I do feel like we're likely to hear more of that coming down the road. So that will be a test. I agree.
He definitely doesn't like it, and he seems to kind of put his foot in his mouth a little bit when it happens sometimes too. So he hasn't figured out a way yet, I think, to really counter any kind of legitimate challenge from the left, even though I think he has the tools to do so, but he just doesn't, I don't know. He hasn't figured it out. It usually comes off as bad. So I like to see where it goes.
Yeah, and I know in every race we have like a lot of people But we also have, I think it's Tony Moreno and Will Parker, who have also joined into this mayoral race. What impact do you see those two campaigns having on the way Mr. Gainey and Mr. Peduto are able to do outreach?
I'm not sure. I tend to be a little cautious, especially of a candidate like Mr. Moreno, who I think first announced his bid in the Tribune Review almost a year ago, 2 years ago, something like that. So,
maybe 2
so
years.
I kind of have a rule about this stuff that I use, and it's partly to keep me sane, so I don't write about every single candidate. If you haven't run before, if you've never done political stuff before, I tend to kind of, unless there's some really compelling reason to write about you, I tend to kind of wait until you've actually proven that you can put together enough signatures to get on the ballot. And so I haven't reached out to Mr. Moreno, though he's been covered by other media. There's sort of a fine line sometimes between covering races and then creating races. And I think there's something to be said for somebody who's seeking office to be able to show, I can build a team, because it's not the hardest thing in the world to get petitions together, but it requires some logistics and understanding of the law. It requires having enough supporters to get out there and do that. Whereas calling up John Delano and being like, I'm running for mayor, is a fairly low bar to clear. So I'm really kind of waiting to see how it goes for both of those gentlemen in terms of what they kind of put together. And then I think I'll sort of have the bandwidth to talk to them, because we got judicial races and a lot of other things happening too.
Right.
And then I think we'll have a better answer to what's really an important question, which is how can they affect these races? And sometimes, even if they don't draw a lot of votes, they can put issues on the table that haven't been there before. Mr. Moreno, as I understand, is a retired police officer. And again, if you just sort of want the illustration of what Bill Dude is up against, he's going to have a lot of progressive activists upset at him because he hasn't done enough to kind of address police misconduct and bias in the judicial system, in the justice system. And then he's going to have a retired cop running at him from that direction. So it'll be very interesting to see if these guys can actually sort of put together something sustaining. And for me, at least, the jury's out on that.
Yeah, I think I've kind of recently felt the same way. A lot of these candidates that call, get the signatures first. It's not that many signatures, Chris, right? It's 250 or something.
For a mayor, it's more, but yeah.
Okay. If you can do that, then maybe you have a real legitimate campaign. But I do expect Moreno to talk about bike lanes, which I would love to see. So,
oh no, not again.
But maybe that might animate some people. It didn't really animate that many people in last time, but who knows?
So, and then following up to Miracle's last question that y'all just addressed, are there any more names floating around out there that could still enter and stir something up, if it's even just to get an issue on the table or anything like that?
I never want to say never, but I think there were a lot of people. I think Mr. Gainey's entrance into the race, once it became kind of clear that he was talking about them, some other names that I had heard were pondering sort of gave way. Maybe Ryan knows some other folks. I'm not really aware of any, kind of candidate with some sort of institutional heft behind him or her. Somebody with stature or whatever, who I would say, oh my God, so and so is running. I'm not aware of somebody like that.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of waiting for Gainey to kind of announce, and kind of when he did, right. It really kind of changed a lot of things. Maybe I agree, if he didn't, then maybe we would have seen a city councilor. But I talked to them last October, and no one really seemed that gung ho about it. I think maybe someone like Sarah, Innamorato, might have been a candidate, but that doesn't seem to be playing out anymore.
Right. Well, yeah. So thank you so much for that amazing conversation about the mayor's race. Now we're going to move on to the judicial races. We'll start with Chris, because I know you did a big, a story on one particular judicial candidate, and then, had some, other judicial candidates, in the story. And obviously, full disclosure, I'm married to an upcoming judicial candidate as well. So, just for the good of the order, it's good. It's good.
We
It's
keep
good to
our
mention
conflict statements.
that. Right. Yeah.
Right.
You know.
But let's not hold that against her. You know, she made one lapse of judgment.
Yeah. So, Chris, it looks like the entire Allegheny bar is running for judge this year.
Yeah, I mean, you knew this was going to happen because, I mean, there are a number of judges, I can't remember if it's 8 or 9 at this point, who decided to retire. They're not ready for retention or whatever else. And so that always brings a lot of people out. And the reason for that is, you know, it's these are kind of low information races. People don't really generally pay attention to who their judicial candidate is. And so, you know, a lot of people run in the hopes that, well, maybe I'll get the Democratic committee endorsement or I'll get a good spot on the ballot or whatever. And so a lot of people jump in early and then there's a sort of attrition. Sometimes people get in just because they know they're not going to win this time, but they start circulating their name around for a run 2, 4, whatever years down the road. What interested me about this race is that we have seen, and the candidate I wrote about, and specifically I focused on, was Lisa Middleman, who of course ran against Steve Zappala for district attorney a little less than 2 years ago. But she's not and she's kind of running as a judge in a way that's very consonant with that campaign she ran in 2019. It's about sort of, you know, how do we make this justice system more just? And you can do that obviously in one kind of way if you run for district attorney. You can do it another way if you run for judge. And, you know, where this is very much the moment that we're in across the country, across the city, across the county, where people are really starting to think about this. And what I think is interesting, I'm always interested in races and candidacies and campaigns that are both significant, there's something really at stake, and also achievable. And these are the kinds of races that a lot of progressive folks, you know, Bethany Hallam is a good example, Sarah Innamorato is a good example, Summer Lee is a good example, Mick Pappas, who in a way his campaign for Magistrate District Judge really kind of set a lot of this in motion. It was sort of the forerunner of a lot of these other campaigns. He also, as I understand it, it will be running for judge. A lot of these folks kind of pursuing that agenda in the kind of race that they've done well in, which is kind of not a lot of attention being paid, and a really committed and devoted activist base can really go out there and drum up numbers amongst like-minded folks, and they can punch way above their weight. Bethany Hallam too, all of those folks, they really punch way above their weight because a lot of folks aren't paying attention. And so in this case, I think you really have the chance for, and it's 8 or 9 folks. We're talking on a county bench that's like 30 odd. So we're talking as much as a quarter of the bench could look different, a year from now. And imagine if they even just won half of those races, half of those seats. All of a sudden, you've now got like a statistically significant number of common pleas judges who are really open to sort of rethinking their role as judges. They're rethinking the whole way the court system works and who it works for and how it functions. So to me, it's a fascinating opportunity because these races usually are just like, no, I don't want to write about them. They're horrible to write about. Nobody says anything. Some of the candidates like really should not be judges, make terrible decisions all the way through. But this time it feels like there's really a possibility for there to be something to kind of sink, for voters and reporters alike to kind of really get their hands around and think about, what do we want our justice system to look like going forward? And I think that's a great question and a great debate to have. So I'm glad to see them running.
Absolutely,
Sorry, go ahead, Kari.
No, you go, Ryan.
So it's really exciting, especially in terms of criminal justice reform. I mean, this is how it happens in Allegheny County. This is the level that it happens. Unless the state legislature is going to really take it seriously as an issue, it's just not really going to change. So these local races are huge, and to have that many people running for common pleas judge that are openly talking about these things as reform tactics, it can be really powerful. And Chris is right when in terms of like, it's such a low information race, it's such a low turnout that you really just have a very dedicated group of people. And if you give them a message, they'll run with it. I mean, the Mick Pappas race, I think, is really telling because he ran as an independent. He didn't run in the Democratic primary. He ran as an independent in the general against an incumbent Democrat and still beat him handedly. I mean, that was kind of a crazy, result. And even on top of the, common pleas too, is some of the magistrate races. I just looked up some of them before we came on, and there's at least 3 candidates that, in the magistrate level that are also kind of talking about restorative justice and how they can kind of use creative tactics to like lower cash bail and stuff like that. And, there's 20 to 21 races, I think, up there too. So we'll see exactly how many people will be openly talking about that on that level. That's probably even less noticeable than the, common pleas judge. But even getting 3 judges, would be huge. It'd be huge. So we'll see.
I did have kind of a technical question. So we know all these people are running. What is the process that goes into writing the voter guides that get put out? Because I feel like now it's going to be a lot more overwhelming, and there's going to be a lot more questions that are going to go into these. So what are some of those questions, and what's that process like?
Do you mean like our voter guides, like what the media does? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Especially for these races, it's a lot harder in off years because, especially for the judge races or anything like that, or even county council races and things like that, is that the candidates don't all put up websites. They don't all put up press releases or anything like that. So it's really hard to even know anything. Kind of have to just reach out and talk to them. But then Chris is right. Sometimes you reach out and talk to somebody and they have no platform. So what's there to write about? In terms of those races, it's honestly really hard. But for like the city council races or the mayor's race, stuff like that, like there's going to be so many stories for those coming out. That makes it a lot easier in terms of just pulling from there. There's a specific question that I need answered or something like that, I'll reach out to the campaign. But other than that, it's usually just a lot of aggregate.
The judicial races is hard. I mean, I think the biggest, if you're not using the Allegheny County Democratic Committee endorsement, the biggest kind of tell here is what the Bar Association has to say, and that's a fairly rigorous process the Bar Association uses. They talk not just to you, the candidate, but to other lawyers who've worked alongside you. It's a pretty serious vetting. It's not to say that, I necessarily agree with every one of their processes, but the judicial ones is hard. I would say that, my own personal sense of this is a lot of times judges sort of hide behind the sort of ethical rules, not to speak on any kind of thing as an excuse for not saying anything. You actually can speak to your general judicial philosophy in a way that doesn't run afoul of any kind of rules. In fact, there are very specific guidelines for how to do that. And, I think we all kind of know, I'm not asking you if, I or a member of my family or whatever comes before you in a courtroom, how you'll rule on their case. But I do want to know, are you somebody who looks, who really has serious questions to ask about putting somebody in jail as opposed to letting them out on bail or whatever. And I think we all know those are, I know from my own family experience in recent months, a decision by some judge that nobody thinks about and probably, pulled the lever for whatever, that person can make decisions that last months, can have downstream effects on children, on other people for years. And so it really is contingent on us, I think, because, and I'm trying to take this very serious myself as a reporter, because I have sometimes been cynical about judicial races in the past because they're so aggravating. But to really this is an opportunity for all of us to kind of really think about what kind of justice system we want and are willing to sort of believe in and work towards. So it's a great question, Miracle, because we all struggle with it. Those of us who write too, how to handle these races and how to sort of handle the candidate who just sort of says, well, I can't speak to any of that stuff. We'll see how it works. This is the first, really, I've been doing this job for 25 years. This is the first time I feel like talking to judicial candidates is going to be something other than an exercise in, head desk frustration for me.
Ryan, why did you have a question?
Yeah. Thanks, Kahari. Chris, you just mentioned the Allegheny County Democratic Committee, and in your article about Lisa Middleman declaring her candidacy, you talked about how impactful an endorsement from them can be. to these candidates and the success of their campaigns. And you also mentioned that they've in the past sometimes had a tendency to shun some of the more progressive candidates. Do you see that as being a potential hindrance in this election cycle to that possible wave of progressive judicial philosophy that you talked about?
Yeah, I think this is the tricky thing. So the endorsements is always an interesting is a journey. And I think that, to be honest, if I were just like some political consultant, and I made a lot of money by giving people advice as opposed to giving it out for free on the Power Hour, I would say probably the only endorsement worth paying for from the Allegheny County Democratic Committee is the judicial endorsement, because for the same reason, it's a low information race. People don't really know who the hell these people are. And you get a slate card that has some names on it. So sure, yeah, these sound like names. I will vote for these people because what else do I have to go on? I really think that is the effect of that, So, but on the other hand, as we have seen in many other races, the value of that endorsement is dropping. And I do feel like kind of the judicial ones are the last ones where it still has any valence at all. I mean, I sort of track this. Anytime a candidate gets like highly recommended by the Bar Association, by their fellow lawyers, but doesn't get the endorsement, like which counts for more with voters, and it's the endorsement, it's the party endorsement that counts for more most of the time. So it's really it's hard to sort of pass up. But what Lisa Millman said to me is it's going to cost a lot of money to go for this, and I don't like necessarily have like cash to burn here. So it's a decision she kind of has to weigh against her feeling that for good reason, that my prospects of getting this endorsement are actually dubious at best, right? So the other question too is just whether after last year, after some bad blood from last go around when the committee didn't snubbed Representative Lee and now Representative Benham and a lot of folks who were sort of seeking its support and got blown off, and they went off to win anyway. And there's a lot of bad blood. Ryan himself did some reporting on, county committee people who are Trump supporters. This may be the year that if you were going to blow it off, this might be this might be the year where I might say, yeah, it's a different calculation than it would have been 2, 4, 6 years ago.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's going to translate either to those, to these, municipal and county and judicial races, but maybe what they could do is kind of wait for someone else to get it, and then they can like run against it. Like I wonder if that'll happen, because you can kind of show that it's kind of flawed in that way. And if you're really savvy, like Democratic politician in the area, maybe you can like use that not only for your own, boost your own, profile, but then also discredit the endorsement process even further. A lot of people have been calling for the endorsement to go away. I think Peduto called it. I'm pretty sure he called for it to go away. So that would be interesting if he's going to seek it, this time around.
Yeah, those are all really interesting points. And as a point of information, I know the judicial endorsement assessment fee, as they call it, is $8,000.
Yeah, that's what I heard. $8,000.
Yeah, so if you want to go for the judicial endorsement, it's $8,000, and if you lose, you don't get it back.
That's why they collect it up front from you now. That used to be a problem. I mean, I will say too, we haven't talked much about state level, but I mean, this is a year where just because it's true locally, but also we're going to have a Supreme Court vacancy on the Supreme Court because Saylor, the one of the 2 Republicans on that panel, is retiring. He's timed out. It's a mandatory retirement at age 75, so he's gone. And I think we have all seen, have we not, in this past year, how significant it can be to have a justice who's aligned with your worldview. I mean, the entire course of this election might be very, very, very different had it not been for Democrats successfully getting their candidates up several years ago in an election that was paying attention.
Huge.
No, you're right. No,
I mean, one of the guys likely to run for the Republican nomination is a Commonwealth judge, Brobson, who was he's a very smart guy, but a pretty staunch Republican, and definitely had a ruling in an election case that was highly adverse to Democrats. So, people, you don't want to go to sleep on those races. And we haven't even talked about what may be a referendum statewide here on electing justices or judges, statewide appellate judges by district.
Right.
Which, if you live in Pittsburgh and you're happy with the way things go, think carefully, because right now it's about the only way in which Allegheny County is overrepresented in state government is at the Supreme Court level. If you look at the number of those folks who came from Allegheny County, it's huge. And there are people, Russ Diamond and other rural legislators, who think, the big city folks have too much influence. And we need to carve out some space for, our brand of politics.
Right, which is a little wild to me, because the last Supreme Court justice to win was from Tioga County. So it's not, that is going to be just a huge issue too. Screw the mayor's race. Let's just write about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know judicial.
Go ahead, Mary.
I know you were referring to like the judicial gerrymandering, and that has also, outside of election, we're talking about criminal justice reform. The other way to have that go is through, filings in the courts. So do you foresee this judicial gerrymandering, as we're talking also about like prison gerrymandering as well, as a means to like stave off this progressive wave of criminal justice reform? Because a lot of these smaller areas also depend on prison labor.
It wouldn't even stave off it. You could just reverse almost so many things, because if they were to switch the way that we elect judges, that would really help Republicans who happen to be rural in Pennsylvania for the most part, especially moving forward. And you could just have a total flip of the entire state Supreme Court. Everything would change. That Ziccarelli case probably would have been handled differently. All the Trump cases could have been handled differently. I mean, it's the ramifications are endless.
Yeah, and I know we only have a couple of minutes left, and I did want to take just an opportunity to talk about a race that's a little further out in the distance that's already giving Chris Potter heartburn. The 2020 U.S. Senate race. We have Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, who was on the show a couple weeks ago. We've heard rumors of Malcolm Kenyatta, first African-American out LGBT legislator who's a darling of Rachel Maddow and MSNBC, and Sharice Street, from a very powerful political family in Philadelphia, the son of the former mayor. And now the current Philadelphia mayor, Jim Kenney, is also given out some feelers that he may jump in as well. So any thoughts about this race? I guess it's never too early to talk about elections.
I disagree, but I'll indulge anyway. There's also on the Republican side a lot of interest in replacing Toomey, and I think half the Republican delegation to Congress right now is considered a candidate, including our very own Guy Reschenthaler from outside Pittsburgh, which would be exciting because maybe then he'll actually answer a question from a local reporter between now and his swearing in.
Guarantee.
Clearly, I'm particularly interested to see what happens on the Republican side, actually, because I think this is sort of the big question of how do they win, statewide races without Trump on the ballot. Pat Toomey, one of the most masterful campaigns of 2016 was his campaign because he was able to finesse, if you look a lot of places that a Republican president could count on winning, like, Upper St. Clair and a lot of those kind of Republican bastions went against Trump even in 2016, but Toomey held on to those. So the question is whether there's still going to be the kind of party where a Republican could do that, and how that primary goes, what kind of Republican party they're going to have. I think it'll be sort of really interesting to see. I think clearly Fetterman is continuing to enjoy incredibly huge national media profile. I didn't see the thing on CBS Morning News. I was hungover. I didn't watch it. I'm sorry. I'm sure it mentioned his tattoos and shit. So clearly he's raising money actively. He's doing the kind of the smart thing, which is trying to clear the field before anybody's even had a chance to get in it. Right. But a lot of twists and turns, and you got to respect a guy who manages to get himself thrown off the floor of the Senate, of the state Senate, and then turns around 2 days later and then like ching, and it just started, the money starts flowing in, for this exploratory effort to see whether he's going to run or not. He's being very shrewd. But we'll have to see how it goes. But I'm really interested to see what happens on that Republican side, because I think that is a party that is going through some stuff and taking us with them.
I like to use a basketball analogy for what Fetterman is doing now. He's really just boxing out, just like massively, like Connor Lamb's over here, and he's just like, get out of here.
Right.
And so yeah, he's done a really, really good job of raising his profile over the last year. It's just massive. But in the same way with the Democratic primary, I still don't know, because there's a lot more Democrats in southeastern Pennsylvania. And you can get a really good candidate from there, potentially, especially a person of color or a woman candidate that could upend even somebody with a profile like Fetterman has. So I still think that one's up in the air. And I agree with Chris that the GOP primaries is going to be really delicious. Like, I'm very excited to see who writes, how they sprint to the right on basically everything. That's my guess. But then what would probably behoove them the most is to get somebody like Toomey and to somehow squeeze through there, and that would probably be their best candidate. But I don't see that happening. So we'll see.
Miracle or Ron?
I think this is going to be like very interesting. In addition, because there's a lot of things going on, and we also believe, that Shapiro's possibly going to be running for governor. So those like Pennsylvania politics is going to be like super interesting. But I know you were saying, Chris, that you don't like the idea of people, or you don't really agree with people announcing early, nationally. Sarah Huckabee said she was like running for governor, and one of the things is like, you're also giving people like 2 years to beat up on you, 2 years to get like all of this negative to do research, instead of waiting for like the weekend before. People are not going to trust you for longer. So why do you think so many people are like announcing outside of the money and outside of like the interviews, I guess? Why do you think so many people are announcing early?
That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I think to some extent, to be honest with you, another thing that's changed in the years I've been a reporter is there's always been a horse race, but never have there been more resources devoted to that stuff. I mean, it's probably not a coincidence that we elected a reality TV star to the presidency 4 years ago, because politics anymore is like reality TV. And one reason I'm sort of like, I was kidding before when Kari said it's never too soon to think, because you kind of have to about 2022 or whatever. But I also think, like, at least for the media, there's that danger of sort of, glomming onto just the sort of national race, the big headline thing or whatever, and kind of forgetting that, like we were saying before, a magistrate district judge, a common pleas judge, can make a decision to affect your family in a more profound and immediate and lasting way than who the next senator of the state of Pennsylvania is going to be. And I don't mean to dismiss the importance of that, but we pay so much attention to these kind of national things: Democrats up, Democrats down, who has control of the Senate. And meanwhile, there's a meat grinder going on, every day out there, and we don't pay as much attention to it because it's hard and because it's not as interesting, and people don't vote and people don't click on those stories, to be honest with you, the way they do. I mean, I could take a story about John Fetterman, and I could put another story about progressives running on a judicial reform candidate as a slate of judges for common pleas judge, and I guarantee you the Fetterman story gets 10 times as much traffic because people are coming from all over the place to read that one. So I think but I do think that there is clearly sort of a market. There's a ton of people who are interested in this stuff, and it is true. I mean, it is significant what happens in the Senate. All of that stuff matters, but it just feels like it's just this pageantry now, and who gets in early builds the name recognition for themselves and all that other kind of stuff. It's the game Fetterman is playing. He's playing it well. And I guess that would be it, but I don't know. It's a great question because I don't think it used to be this way. Maybe I just know more about politics than I did when I started out, and I just wasn't as aware of what was going on. But I don't think it was like this 25 years ago. I don't think it was this pronounced.
I think it's about, to use a new word, but it's about clout, like it's about building up yourself as this like figure, and like that seems to be like a new political strategy. It definitely worked for Trump, and like Guy Reschenthaler is definitely doing that same thing, more among the right, but he's definitely trying to build his brand basically, and Fetterman is doing that as well, and yeah, I guess that's why you announce early so that you can have more clout time, more time to build it. But I agree, it's also frustrating because these local races really do make a huge difference. And, covering the district attorney's race in 2019, that just felt like such a struggle to get people really to be invested in that race. And even during the era of Trump and all these different things, and just, I know it was complicated because Apollo was both a Democrat, but he also kind of started to campaign to the right once he secured that nomination, and which was smart. But it was just hard to get people to really, really take in that race and understand that like the district attorney has so much discretion and power in Allegheny County, and so sometimes I'm with Chris, and I want those Senate candidates to just wait a little bit longer so that these people, so we can get people to pay attention to these local races. But I also understand that that's not really the name of the game. The media is all encompassing now. It is about entertainment. It's a lot like sports casting shows, like those are so huge, and they just like, they don't talk about anything, but they're everywhere. And politics is really the same. It really is the same exact thing at this point, where it's like you just have 24 hours of trying to fill the media void.
Absolutely. And I'll give Ryan White the final question of tonight.
Yeah, honestly, I'll just follow up on that. That you mentioned, that now it's like a sports casting show, honestly, where it's just, about building your brand and clout. And everything along those lines. So taking this back to the mayoral election for this year, how much do you think that general trend that we're seeing at the national and state level is going to apply to something like the mayoral race on more of a local level? And how much do you think that's really going to boost, Ed Gainey's ability to compete in that election?
I think that's up to Gainey. I think that's Gainey is going to have to try to push himself into that level where he can, I guess, try to get to that. But it's a lot harder on a local level to be like, I don't know, Fetterman's getting kicked off of the, the Senate floor and stuff like that. That becomes a national story. So if Gainey wants to, he might be able to, capitalize on a moment of, national stories. But that also is contingent on whether or not Pittsburgh is under a national spotlight, like it was recently with stupid Ted Cruz, you talking about us and stuff. But Peduto kind of used that to his advantage until he didn't, because he talked about protesters again. But I think that's going to be harder because you kind of have to wait for those organic moments to put Pittsburgh in a national spotlight, which don't come up all the time.
Yeah, I remember thinking Ted Cruz should have to report that tweet as an in-kind contribution to the Peduto campaign, because he made the mayor look pretty easy, a pretty low-hanging curve to just take a swat at.
He already had it. He already had his pick tweet as that. He's like,
I know. It's a good question. Because in part, I think, I don't know that there'll ever be sort of a huge amount of like national interest in this race. And and I'm fine with that, honestly. I do think that there's a way in which a lot of times now, I think we live in a more ideological age. And so a lot of things that are sort of national level thoughts or whatever do percolate down in the way we think about issues. And sometimes that can be good and sometimes that can be bad, right? Were there not all those other protests happening in the country? Were there not a mass recognition that like, hey, this isn't just something, we didn't just have some issue, with Jordan Miles or Johnny Gamage or Breonna Taylor, or any of that. Like, you could go through names in individual cities all over the place, but to sort of see that happening on a national level and to realize like it's both here in my own backyard and it's a national thing. I mean, I think that can be like a real force for change. I also think, though, that at times it can be sort of like a poisonous kind of thing as well in different kinds of ways, because you can have people who sort of distill these national issues down into a local level where, honestly, your city councilor, your mayor may or may not be in a position to do anything about it. And so I think I just think we're very much in this really sort of ideological age. I mean, it's, there's a phrase for it, the big sort, right? People are literally moving into communities where they think people are like-minded politically or philosophically or whatever, on top of every other kind of way in which we divide ourselves. You can do a shorthand now of who buys what products and all that kind of stuff. And so I think like, how that plays out in this race, I don't really know. But I do, it used to be all politics are local. Somebody said that. And it feels less true. And I'm sorry that I'd be sorry if it turned out not to be true at the end of the day, because I think it's really important who we are and how we recognize each other from across the street. So I hope not. I hope it doesn't play any role. I hope these two gentlemen just go and have a good campaign and talk about visions for how policing should be done and how a city should be run, and we get to make the decision on that basis rather than some bullshit that Ted Cruz tweets.
Yes, please, agreed.
Yeah. He was a Houston Oilers fan. That's all. I just want to say that again. The fact that guy is out there peddling black and gold bumper stickers with a Texas. Let's get him. Let's go. I'm actually, I take it back. I'm for nationalizing politics. Let's get Ted Cruz.
Oh man, the Houston Oilers, man. That brings back some memories.
Campbell, baby.
Well, for those, I'm really aging myself. I think it was 89 89 in New Year's Eve, the Gary Anderson 50-yard field goal in the Astrodome, man. That was one of the great moments. Like when I was a kid, the Steelers sucked. So, it wasn't really no Steeler Nation in the early 80s, man. It was beat downs by Bernie Kosar, and Boomer Esiason on a regular basis. Man, the 80s. But I'm aging myself,
You're aging me just listening to it. I feel like Bernie Kosar was enough to. I'm now 53.
Well, it's not a One Hood Power Hour unless there's a Houston Astrodome reference for some reason. No, but I really want to thank Ryan Deto from the Pittsburgh City Paper and Chris Potter from WESA for staying with us for an entire hour. And I definitely know Western Pennsylvania is much more educated about politics, more than they ever would be otherwise. So thank you so much for taking out this time. I'm definitely looking forward to doing this again soon in a couple months as we get closer to May 18th. We'll do a side-by-side comparison.
I'm looking forward to that.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again. Chris Potter from WESA and Ryan Deto from the Pittsburgh City Paper joining us for our spring 21 primary election preview. Wow. 3 weeks in a row. Incredible shows. And this is the time when we go to Miracle for housekeeping. Obviously that's not because she's a woman, because we don't do, the gender specific thing like that. You know what I mean? But Miracle handles the business.
All right. First things first, we talked about the election. So make sure you are registered to vote. If you changed your address, you just moved, you're new to the area, just double check your registration. You can go onto Secretary of State's website. We also have a number next week that you can text to your phone to double check. So we talked about the mayor's tweet. If you don't know what we're talking about, or you want to know more information, tomorrow at 2:00, what Blacks Pittsburgh need to know over on One Hood's Facebook and YouTube. We're talking about the inferences of that tweet and what does it mean when people basically call Black Lives Matter organizers Nazis, for a better term of art. If you want to know more about white supremacy, we have you covered, because Wednesday at 6 p.m., we're talking about This Week in White Supremacy, and we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff, so you can tune in. If you appreciated the media references, Thursday at 6:30 over on Clubhouse, I am hosting a chat with Nebias Wilborn about sports and mental health and media. We wouldn't be remiss if we didn't talk about, this is the 1-year anniversary of the on-time passing of, the Mamba. And so we're going to be talking about a lot of that stuff and how it means for us as we, consume sports, but also be impacted by sports. And then if you love art, because we are an arts-based organization, this Saturday we have the Next Level Slam on One Hood's Facebook, YouTube as well, hosted by the amazing Treble NLS. You can turn in Saturday at 6 p.m. and that is our roundup for our programming this week.
Awesome. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. We'll see you next Monday at 7 p.m. And again, special thanks to Ryan Deto of the Pittsburgh City Paper, as well as Chris Potter from WESA. Thank you for joining us. Stay engaged, stay involved, stay safe. And Miracle, do you have something else that you wanted to add before we?
Yes, and again, thank you so much to Mayor Nesby of Duquesne for joining us. Please make sure you send her a letter of encouragement, tweet, email. That's just a lot to be going, through during a global pandemic as well. So make sure you send some support and love her way.
Yep, definitely. Special thanks to Mayor Nickole Nesby for joining us earlier in the hour. So much has gone on. This has been such a power-packed show. It's almost like that was like a whole other show that happened earlier today. So definitely super shout outs to Mayor Nickole Nesby at Duquesne. So on behalf of my colleagues Ryan White and Miracle Jones, this is Kahari Mosley signing off. Till next Monday at 7. Thank you for joining the One Hood Power Hour. Good night.